form that characterizes Genesis 1.
So because there are different genres here, it depends on what story we're talking about. And I think that what I often observe you doing is we might talk about Christianity, and if you aren't comfortable committing to a historical ideal, you'll start talking about the spirit moving over the face of the waters, which is obviously a much more mythological ideal. And not...
Yeah, good one. Alex will catch him run from this spot and then dip to somewhere else. What do you mean Leviathan wrestled with Yahweh? I mean, come on. Of course that's mythological. Dude, we just asked about Jesus. We just asked about the miracle of the walking out of the tomb. What the hell? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be reacting to Navigating Belief, Skepticism, and the Afterlife, Alex O'Connor and Jordan Peterson. I have heard some promising stuff about this one. I don't want to spend too much time here. Let's go ahead and dive in and see what Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor have to say. We've been on a Jordan Peterson run lately, so let's continue.
I think that the physicality of God is an interesting question.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament tradition, it seems to evolve as far as I can see. If you look at some of the earlier descriptions of God, you've got a God who walks through the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
You've got a God who has a council of angels and the accuser. You have a sort of, it's being at least conceptualized as a much more physical being. And as time goes on, God becomes less localized. And I've heard a lot of theories as to why that's the case. I've just done an episode on my own show.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true.
Well, Jordan's not going to agree, but ancient Near Eastern academics, of course, scholars in the Hebrew Bible would point out that different redactors with different perceptions may be coming in with an evolution of God, right? That is the typical critical scholarly point of view. One is more of a tangible, willing to get his hands dirty, walk and talk with humans. And you get this distanced, heavenly, celestial Yahweh that happens over time. And in that particular situation, that's later. So this evolution of thought's going on. This is just mainstream critical scholarship here.
Exactly. I don't think there's a clear historical progression like that. There is a constant tension between God as ineffable and then God as manifest in a manner that's comprehensible, right? And Mircea Eliade mapped the
Mircea Eliade, which well-known comparative mythologist,
consequences of this out to some degree. So he was very interested in Nietzsche's proposition that God had died. Most people, including Nietzsche, regarded that as like a unique historical event.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with the Hebrew Bible? Anyway, we're jumping in the middle of the conversation here, so maybe I'm missing something.
There was a religious tradition. The Enlightenment arose. In consequence, we became skeptical about God. And in 1850, the philosophers decided that he was no longer necessary or real. But Eliade, who is a brilliant historian of religions,
he was,
has noted that this has happened many, many times, that God has vanished, disappeared. And one of his explanations for that is that a God that's too ineffable, so that's completely outside of the categories of time and space, let's say, and who doesn't make himself present as a being, who doesn't have a heavenly council, who has no hierarchy between the pinnacle and earth itself, tends to float off into space. It becomes so abstract that you can't have a relationship with it, and then he disappears.
In many ways, this is what Christianity provides with the New Testament and the figure of Jesus. That's why I think for a lot of Christians, the more important question for you and the question that they're interested in, and you're quite right that a lot of people are like, I want to get you on my team.
Yeah.
I have no dog in this fight. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of Christians are frustrated when they begin asking about Jesus, who's a much more physical entity. Right? It's a real human being. It's someone with flesh and blood. It's someone who's physically crucified by the Romans.
Very different.
I wonder if Jordan really does believe that. I mean, I think he does.
Different questions, very different questions.
And then is seen as a physical entity, at least according to the canonical tradition, by his disciples after he died.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks you, do you believe that happened?
I love Alex. Alex is like, when it comes to somebody who's going to get Jordan to actually answer the question, it's going to be Alex O'Connor. He has just a way with very sharp, precise words and knows how to cut real clear.
And when I've seen you ask about that question, you tend to still speak in terms of the psychological and the mythological. I think the frustration is that, as you've just said,
these are I don't mind frustrating Christians in that regard either, because the truth of the matter is, with regard to the gospel accounts, that the mythological and the historical are inextricably cross-contaminated.
Sure.
There's no pulling out the historical Jesus.
We agree. Holy shiznit. Me and Jordan Peterson agree. And I don't think, and now I see that as problematic because it kind of leads credence to the possibility that, like, we'll never know anything that actually happened historically here. It's contaminated, and Strauss said this a while back, David Friedrich Strauss.
Right. That's a non-starter. And why that is, I don't know. It's very.
Why the historical and mythological, and I don't know if it's historical, is written in such a manner that I think it's because the authors did that on purpose.
Mysterious. It's very hard to understand, as are the, let's say, the accounts of the resurrection. Okay, so what do I think about that? Well, I think that denying the historical reality of Christ I think that's just a fool's errand.
Of course.
Why anybody would bother with it.
So a man exists called Jesus.
Yes.
That much.
Now, Christ,
I don't think it's necessarily a fool's errand, but you're never going to prove it, and you're never going to not prove it.
There's a claim that...
I mean, you could prove it if evidence shown up, but it's a negative, right? So you can have high confidence in whatever path by prior probability or whatever, if you want.
It is attributed to Christ that he is the embodiment or the incarnation, the fulfillment, let's say, of the prophet and the laws.
Yes.
I think that's true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, I think it's in the Gospel of John. I think God...
Dude, I wonder, Alex is getting ready to, like, hammer Jordan here, but I really wish I could read Alex's mind going, dude, when he stops this, I got to ask this. I got to try to pin him down.
Gospel of John closes with a statement that something like, if all the books that were ever written were written about the gospel accounts, that wouldn't be enough books to explain what had happened.
Yeah, if all the things that Jesus did.
Yeah, and there's a truth in that. The truth is that profound religious account is bottomless, and the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear, not least because the text itself is deeply cross-referenced. So there's an innumerable number of paths through it. It's like a chessboard. And so it's inexhaustible in its interpretive space.
That's true.
And that's a problem too, because it means it's also susceptible to multiple interpretations, including potentially competing interpretations.
I think
well, it's not just that. It's like they intentionally had different purposeful writings which competed with the other writings, which causes different interpretations. And one of the major problems that Christians who are trying to understand what happened and to make sense of this stuff, it's a mess. Let's just be honest. It's a mess that makes any historical journey very tough, if not impossible, to know anything about.
People interpret Paul, for example, the earliest New Testament source, as saying that if Jesus did not literally rise from the dead, if there was not a man who stopped breathing and then started breathing again, then your faith is futile and you're still in your sins. That is, Christianity is undermined. Now, that means that, and Paul doesn't say sort of believing that that's false is really bad. He says, if you do not believe this proactively, then your faith is futile.
There's a problem I have with that.
If you don't proactively believe that yourself, then I think when a Christian asks you, do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? Are you a Christian? I think you must be committed.
Dude, Jordan, I wonder if there's like a body language interpreter who can like see the language, and he knows Alex is a sharp cookie. And I think he knows what Alex is really trying to do. And there's two wits at competition here trying to get to the answer.
It's saying no, at least under that interpretation of Paul. And even if you're not sure, I mean, it's fine if I say to you, do you think that a man physically rose from the dead? And you say something like, well, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there, but I think it has a lot of mythological significance, or I think that maybe it happened in a different sense, or it happened in the sense that good fiction happens, then fine. But it needs to begin with that caveat of the simple sort of, historically speaking, I don't know. And I know you don't like to pull out the historical Jesus and mythological.
That's a good objection.
But it's an important question to ask.
No, of course. It's a very good objection. So I just did a seminar on the Gospels with a crew of about 8 people, and it was the same crew that walked through Exodus with me with a couple of variations. And we spent a lot of time on the resurrection accounts, for example. And of course, that was the toughest, morsel to chew and digest. The thing about the resurrection accounts is that they're all, so I could say something like this, which...
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go.
Will just annoy people, but it doesn't matter. I believe the accounts, but I have no idea what they mean.
When you say you believe the accounts, do you mean, and I hate to be sort of pedantic here, it seems pedantic, but do you mean you believe that these are things that happened such that that's a strange I know you don't like that. Let me put it this way. If I went back in time with a Panasonic video camera and put that camera in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man walk out of that tomb?
I would suspect yes.
So that...
I would suspect, I mean, he's so careful, even with the answer of that, right? I would suspect yes.
That to me seems like a belief in the historical event of the resurrection, or at least of Jesus leaving the tomb, which means that when somebody says, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It doesn't seem clear to me why you're not able to just say, it would seem to me yes.
Because I have no idea what that means. And
bro, everyone that I know, I've never met a person who acts like they don't know what the idea of a body that's dead rising up from the grave, from the dead, is now physically resurrected. Now, you can say, I think there's much more that went on there. I don't understand all that went into the components of that, but everyone understands that a corpse idea of resurrecting. Now, there's some who dispute it and say, no, it was a spirit resurrection. Or some critical scholars think the earliest form of the resurrection wasn't necessarily the same body, right? But that he is alive again after dying, literally, he dies, and in some way, he's actually alive again. We're not talking just in myth, in legend, in story, but in some real ontological way, this guy is dead and alive again. And I think almost anyone and everyone on the planet knows what that means, which is why it feels so deceptive to me that he can't just express the same definitional terms that everyone else is talking about. I can't help it. I can't help but think that this is just deceptive.
Neither did the people who saw it.
Neither did the people who saw it. Yeah, they were a little blown away in the story about what they were experiencing and how he was alive again, if you take the Gospels. But in Paul, that's a whole different ordeal. They said that he appeared to them somehow with an internal apocalypse, a vision, something like that. But those are two discrepancies. So let's skip this ExpressVPN here.
EXPRESSVPN.com/Jordan. Go to expressvpn.com/Jordan to learn more.
Here we go.
I mean, I suppose one...
Look, let's approach this obliquely, let's say.
Yeah.
The miracle of the loaves and the fishes.
Yeah.
Okay, so people will say, well, do you believe that happened literally, historically? It's like, well, yes, I believe that. It's okay. Okay, what do you mean by that? That you believe that? Exactly.
Yeah.
So you tell me you're there in the way that you described.
Right.
And
what do you see?
What are the fish doing
Yeah.
exactly? And the answer is you don't know. You have no notion about it at all. You have no theory about it.
Sure.
So your belief is, what's your belief exactly?
Well, I think a Christian might say something like, my belief is that I have no idea, looking at those fish, what I would see in the process of them being converted into enough food for the 5,000 to eat. I have no idea what I would see. But I do know that what I would see is the fish end up being spread amongst the 5,000. In the same way,
right.
Like if I opened up the water jar, what would I see when the water became wine? I have no idea. Does it sort of blend from one color into another? Does it suddenly snap? Does it disappear and then reappear? I don't know.
Right.
But what I do know as a Christian is that I would see something at some event in which, when I look at the beginning, it's water, and when I look at the end, it's wine. And I mean, actually, I don't mean that Jesus turning water into wine is some kind of, inextricably mythological story, and the question of whether it happened sort of doesn't matter, or maybe it happened in a meta manner, or maybe it happened in a hyper reality.
I love that you're doing this, Alex. Yes, thank you for holding his feet to the fire, because I think we all speak the same language.
I would be, as a Christian,
I'm more inclined I'm more inclined rather than to believe. I'm more inclined to understand. And then when I hit the limits of my understanding, I think, I don't understand that. Now, do I believe it or not believe it? I think often, especially with regards to biblical matters, let's say, I have a suspension of belief and disbelief.
Yeah, and that's fine too.
I think part of the reason that I've been able to be an effective interpreter of the biblical texts and a relatively scientific interpreter is because I approach the texts with respect, the same respect that I would approach a lab animal. It's like, I don't know what this is. Like, I seriously don't know. And I'm not going to come at it with axiomatic assumptions that are unquestionable. I'm going to try to see what's right in front of my eyes. I'm going to try to see what mystery reveals itself if I take this phenomenon seriously.
Well, I mean, I think most of us who are approaching this material, maybe some of us have axe to grind, if you will, chips on our shoulders. Most of us who are interpreting this material take it serious. But what we do is we want a methodology that anchors it into this historical, cultural context to try and understand it, where it was originally written, why, who understood it in their original context. And it's interesting to also see how people interpreted it over time. But I'm not going to Carl Jung or, reading, The Hero with 1,000 Faces to understand the book of Deuteronomy. I'm going to try and place these law codes, these narratives in the ancient context to try and understand. And the only way to do that is to situate it there and to understand other, material at the time. And so it's just an odd thing that he made me think of Jung too, because I know he's a Jungian type thinker, where he says, I suspend disbelief. One time Carl Jung was asked, do you believe in God? And he goes, I don't believe, I know God. Like, I know. And it was like, what does he mean by that? Clearly he's doing something with words where he's trying to say something different than what everyone else is saying by believing in God.
This is one of the things that I find puzzling, for example, about Dawkins, because Dawkins
damn it, Dawkins asking about that virgin birth.
Formulated the idea of meme, which is, by the way, the same idea as archetype. It's exactly the same idea, except he just stopped. It's like, okay, there are memes they're selected for. Okay, selected on what basis exactly? Does that mean there's a hierarchy of memes? Are the memes that are conserved more likely to be, what would you say, viable organisms? And if they're viable organisms, are they microcosms?
This is really interesting in terms of the survivability, because there's a point, I've spoken to Richard Dawkins, a number of times, but twice on my podcast. And the second time, somebody pointed out to me that there might be a point of agreement between you two that has been overlooked, which is that, I don't know if you've ever come across the evolutionary argument against naturalism, or the argument from reason, the idea that if you're a materialist, you can't trust your reasonable faculties. So Alvin Plantinga formulated this very well, very, very geniusly, I think, in saying that if you believe that evolution by natural selection happens materially, what does natural selection select for? Survivability. So if you're a materialist, that means that the very rational faculty that you're using right now evolves not to be sensitive to truth, but to survivability.
Yes, that's right.
And if that's the case, well, why do you believe in the truth of evolution? Well, because you've been rationally convinced of it. But the thing that you've just assented to, the belief itself has just undercut the process by which you take that belief.
There's a whole, the New England pragmatists figured this out like 1880.
Yeah, no, I think this is fascinating. I think it really is just
It is.
It's exciting. It's novel.
That's for sure.
That's for sure.
It's actually a point where Darwin and Newton do not come together.
How do you mean?
Well, the Darwinian definition of true and the Newtonian definition of true are not the same thing.
Here's the thing. You had a conversation with Sam Harris. You've had a number, but one of them, I don't think it was a live event. I think it was before that. You're talking about truth.
Yeah,
and you're
very
trying
awkward. Second talk I had with him, I was extremely ill.
It was awkward to listen to, because it felt very much like, and I remember at the time thinking, what is this Jordan Peterson talking about? Like, truth is like Darwinian. Truth is about like survivability. What do you mean? Truth is
true the way an arrow flies.
Yeah, right. And now I asked Richard Dawkins about the evolutionary argument against naturalism. I said, well, how can you know that what you believe is true? And he said, because believing true things makes me more likely to survive.
Hey, watch where you go with that.
I didn't catch it at the time, but I thought to myself afterwards, it was one of my commenters on Patreon actually had mentioned this. He was listening to Richard, and I said, but sometimes it's at least possible that something that's false helps you to survive. The rustling in the bushes, believing that that's a lion every time or a tiger, even if it's not, that helps you to survive, because that one time that it is, you're still going to run away, and it costs you nothing to run away when it's not a tiger. So believing it's a tiger, even when it's not, it's going to help me to survive.
That's why we have a negativity bias.
Yeah, and Dawkins says, well, yeah, of course there are some circumstances where believing something false could be beneficial to survival. And I said, well, how do you know that 2 + 2 = 4 is not one of those? And it seemed as though he was just saying that believing that would not be advantageous to our survival, which might well be true. But if that's the case, then suddenly I'm listening to what you're saying about truth being more sort of Darwinian and related to survivability. And I think maybe you two would agree there. And I think, well, why is it that when you sit down with Richard Dawkins, you find it difficult to have a conversation with each other? And
well, I think it's partly because we don't know each other very well.
That's
right. And so, and also, there are things he knows that I don't know, and there are things I know that he doesn't know. Now, I would say, in my defense, that what would you say? I'm more of aware of the things he knows that I don't know than he is of the things I know that he doesn't know. Right. So, for example, as far as I can tell, Dawkins doesn't know anything about the Jungian tradition of literary interpretation, and that actually, if you're going to talk about religion, that's actually a fatal flaw. Right. So. And, he's called me, for example, drunk on symbols. It's like, well, the imagination is a biological function, and it has a structure and a purpose, and it has its own logos, its own intelligible order. And if you're not aware of that order, that doesn't make me drunk on symbols. It just means you don't know what you're talking about.
Now, that frustration that you appeal to there, when you hear Richard Dawkins I think Terry Eagleton said that listening to Dawkins on theology is like listening to somebody write a book about biology whose only knowledge of the subject is having once read the Great British Book of Birds. And okay, fair enough.
But that actually turns out to be a real problem. And it's a problem with regards even to the meme idea, because you don't have to extend Dawkins' work very far to understand that religious stories are memes.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a hierarchy of memes, and some of them are very functional.
But then here's the thing.
So okay. Well, Jesus, man. I mean, honestly, this, again, I feel like I have to just say this. It's like this. I actually agree with Jordan here. I agree with him that there's depth and there are memes and there's, not every freaking one might be. They're memes, but they may not serve in this necessarily eternal lesson on, like, well, Agamemnon gonna sacrifice Iphigenia. Like, sure, you can reinterpret this to have a modern context of we're sacrificing our children if we go to war. Reinterpret these things to have them have meaning eternally. But just his kind of reluctance to engage in the direct historical and be blunt about his answer, what he really thinks about it, and then jumping to, but here's the deal. There's a deeper level to this talk, and the Bible is not fundamentally just a, did it happen or not, and therefore throw it away. Like, there's a lesson he could teach here by speaking the language everyone else is speaking. And the fact that Jordan doesn't do that well, he could improve on, is what makes people frustrated, I think. Because most people who are believers or non-believers are dealing and engaging in the did it happen or did it not happen. It happens on a meta, and it always happens. Well, that doesn't help, okay? It doesn't help because you're not educating to go from where they're at, meeting them where they're at, educating them to bring them to the meme idea, to what you're trying to say. And I can get on board with this because I love learning the mythology myself. There's levels to this. There's layers to the depths and the ancient writings. Yes, I just find it frustrating,
Like that frustration that you're sort of throwing in that direction. I think people throw towards you.
Yeah.
And when you say, well, religion, you don't have to look very far to see that religion is a meme. Well, without further clarification, and of course there's going to be it, you can understand why to somebody first listening, that sounds almost atheistic. Well, religion is a meme. No,
right?
Religion is not a true historical account of, the history of the universe.
It's not a true historical account.
It's a meme.
Hey, I appreciate that. I mean, a lot of these fundamentalists need it to be a true historical account. Thanks for mentioning that it's not.
When you say that the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, what does it mean historically that the Spirit of God brooded upon the primordial waters? Like, what does that mean historically?
Well,
no one knows.
I agree.
I
don't think that at least most of Genesis or parts of Genesis are supposed to be. I mean, the Bible is a library, right? It's not a book, and that means that it's going to contain different genres.
That's for sure.
And so when
and some of them are more historically accurate, and some of them tilt more towards that kind of elusive. I don't mean elusive in the. I mean ALLUSIV.
Yeah, sure.
Right. That elusive and symbolic form that characterizes Genesis 1.
So because there are different genres here, it depends on what story we're talking about. And I think that what I often observe you doing is we might talk about Christianity, and if you aren't comfortable committing to a historical ideal, you'll start talking about the Spirit moving over the face of the waters, which is obviously a much more mythological ideal. And not...
Yeah, good one. Alex will catch him run from this spot and then dip to somewhere else. What do you mean Leviathan wrestled with Yahweh? I mean, come on. Of course that's mythological. Dude, we just asked about Jesus. We just asked about the miracle of the walking out of the tomb. What the hell?
Not quite equivocating them, but moving between them too quickly and not delineating them enough. So if I asked you, do you think that the Spirit moved across the face of the waters? And you said to me something like, I think it's still happening.
Right, that is what I would say.
Hey, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense.
It always happens. It happened at the beginning of time, and it's always happening.
When somebody says, did the Exodus story happen? Did the Jews enslaved in Egypt break free of their slavery and move to the Promised Land across the desert for 40 years? Did that happen? You have also said, of the Exodus specifically, it's still happening.
Yes.
Now, to me, that's far more inappropriate than saying that the Spirit is still moving across the face of the waters, because I think what people mean there is, do you believe that these people in that time period actually did this in such a way that, for instance, might show up in an archaeological report?
Well, I think that's the simplest answer to that is probably.
I mean, probably someone. Look, Alex's face. Good job, Alex. You're trying, man. You're doing your best. You know what I mean?
Sure, and that's fine too. But
we don't know. To the degree that there's been archaeological investigations into the kinds of biblical narratives that you've described, the archaeological evidence tends to fall on the side of historical accuracy in relationship to the Bible, quite surprisingly often.
Clearly, you spent more time in Exodus than probably any person I'd ever met in person, right? Clearly the story sort of captivates you and you think it's really important and can
it's
teach us a lot, right?
Yeah,
of course.
it's infinitely deep story.
I think most people speaking to you already know that you think that, right? Mm-hmm. And so when they ask you a question, when they suddenly say to you, but do you think it really happened?
Well, what the hell does that mean?
You must know that.
God, I mean, bro, we keep coming back to this. What does that mean? Well, now you know what that means when Alex has already explained to you what people think this means. I mean, dude, I can't help but think there's something slippery here. All right, I'm going to end it here because there's much more to get into here in the Bible and understanding Jordan's view and hearing Alex pick it apart. But what do you think? I just can't get over how he keeps doing this. Comment in the comment section what your thoughts are. I want to hear it. I want to see it. Drop a like, and subscribe and hit that bell. If you don't hit that bell, when I drop a reaction, YouTube won't notify you. We want to stay connected here and share this bad boy out. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, see you then.